In the mid-20th century, an area known as the Rust Belt, stretching from the Midwest to the northeastern United States, thrived with industrialization. Many of the cities within it were heavily populated, and their futures looked optimistic. But today, many Rust Belt cities are a shell of what they once were, depopulated and riddled with crime, poverty, and corruption. Can the Rust Belt rise up once again? Well, this is a vision by President Trump and his administration. Trump has always been for imposing tariffs on other nations, such as a 25% tax on steel and aluminum, with the intention of making domestic products more competitive and encouraging companies to manufacture within the United States. In early 2025, the Trump administration rolled out a bunch of aggressive new tariffs meant to shake up U.S. trade and boost American manufacturing. It slapped a 10% tariff on imports across the board, raised it to 25% for goods coming from Canada and Mexico, and even hit Chinese imports with a massive 145% tariff. Though, that one was later scaled back to 30% after a temporary deal was reached. There are proponents and opponents to these policies, and we'll come back to that later. First, let's discuss the geographical history of industrialization in the United States. Industry in the US began in the Northeast during the early 19th century, where rivers powered textile mills, and manufacturing boomed in cities like Lowell, Massachusetts, and Paterson, New Jersey. As the country expanded westward, the Great Lakes and Midwest, especially cities like Detroit, Chicago, Cleveland, and Pittsburgh, became industrial giants thanks to access to coal, iron, and railroads. This region, later known as the Rust Belt, drove America's rise as a global industrial power in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Many immigrants from Europe, such as Italians, Irish, Poles, Germans, and others, immigrated to the US for work opportunities, and most wound up working in factories within the Rust Belt. However, by the 1960s, several downturns occurred. Factories began adopting machines that reduced the need for manual labor, leading to widespread job losses in heavy industry. Internally within the US, companies moved operations to the south and west to an area known as the Sun Belt, where there were lower taxes, cheaper labor, and less unionization. As industrialization left Midwestern and Northeastern cities, middle-class residents moved to the suburbs, draining cities of tax revenue. This led to disinvestment, rising poverty, and decaying infrastructure. In addition, Sunbelt industrial centers even began suffering from offshoring, especially to neighboring Mexico and overseas to China. By the 21st century, most Americans worked in tertiary service sector jobs, further leading to the erosion of industrialization. Yet, where deindustrialization was the most prominent, many Americans who didn't have the opportunities to achieve service sector jobs suffered socioeconomically, leading to widespread poverty. Deindustrialization didn't happen overnight within the Rust Belt, but rather over several decades. The three most prominent cities within the Rust Belt are Detroit, Michigan, Cleveland, Ohio, and Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Detroit became an industrial powerhouse during the late 19th century, but really evolved in the early 20th century when Henry Ford established the Ford Motor Company in 1903, and thereafter, General Motors and Chrysler were established there, making the city the world's automotive capital. This provided thousands of jobs for people within the city and led to its population surging to 1.8 million people by 1950, the fifth largest in the nation. In addition, many individuals from the South, including blacks moving northward to escape Jim Crow laws, became employed in automotive factories. During that same time period, workers in these factories began unionizing, which created better wages and benefits. But as time went by, unionized employees wanted more, and this created tensions between the Big Three and auto workers. By the 1960s, the American auto industry began to decline. Detroit automakers became complacent, producing large inefficient cars, just as foreign competitors like Toyota and Honda entered the market with more reliable, fuel-efficient vehicles. The oil crises of the 1970s made matters even worse, and rising labor costs, strikes, and a failure to adapt accelerated the downfall. As manufacturing jobs moved to the South, Mexico, and overseas, Detroit's economy crumbled. The 2008 financial crisis nearly destroyed the U.S. auto industry, leading to federal bailouts for GM and Chrysler. Detroit itself filed for bankruptcy in 2013, leading to further difficulties. Cleveland became a major industrial city during the same time period as Detroit, and developed into a manufacturer of steel, car parts, and chemicals. Its population grew dramatically in the 1940s, and the city peaked at a population of 915,000 residents in 1950. Strong unions and issues in Detroit led to Cleveland also suffering economically during the 1960s, and this resulted in depopulation as well as skyrocketing crime rates through the 1970s. However, by the 1980s, Mayor George Voinovich was credited with improving the city's economy. It's seen diversification. Still, Cleveland has many rampant socioeconomic problems, including poverty, homelessness, and crime due to deindustrialization. Pittsburgh was known as the steel capital of the world, and this contributed heavily to Detroit's car industry. The city's population grew through the early 20th century and peaked at 677,000 residents in 1950. Pittsburgh's steel industry collapsed in the late 1970s and the early 1980s due to a mix of global competition, outdated infrastructure, and economic shifts. Foreign producers like Japan and West Germany were making steel more efficiently and cheaply using newer technologies, while Pittsburgh's mills remained older and labor-intensive. U.S. steel companies failed to modernize in time, and high labor costs from strong union contracts made it harder to compete. At the same time, the 1979 to 1982 recession caused demand for steel to plummet, especially in the auto and construction sectors. Adding to the pressure, newer and more efficient mini mills emerged in the South and the West using scrap metal and offering lower cost. Unlike Detroit and Cleveland, however, Pittsburgh diversified earlier and more effectively by investing in education, healthcare, and technology. Anchored by institutions like Carnegie Mellon University and the University of Pittsburgh, the city became a hub for robotics, biotech, and artificial intelligence. And this led to its population stagnating at just above 300,000 residents instead of dropping. And the city even saw slight growth in the last 5 years. There has always been discussions about trying to bring industrialization back to the United States. But is it feasible to do so? That's a debate that has been occurring for decades. In 1992, the North American Free Trade Agreement, also known as NAFTA, was signed by the US, Canada, and Mexico and took effect in 1994. This deal eliminated tariffs on most goods traded between the three countries. This free trade factor led to American corporations, such as the big three automakers, to manufacture more products in Mexico, where wages were 1/5 of US wages, and this further eroded the industrial sectors of Rust Belt cities, especially Detroit. In 2018, under the first Trump administration, a new deal, the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, was reached between the three nations. This agreement included key changes such as stricter rules for auto manufacturing, higher labor standards, environmental protections, and provisions for digital trade. While this deal was more favorable to bring back American industrialization, it still didn't bring all manufacturing back, leading to the introduction of new tariffs by the second Trump administration. By introducing these tariffs, it promotes corporations to manufacture products in the United States, thus providing jobs. President Trump isn't the only politician for tariffs. Democrat Bernie Sanders, a proclaimed democratic socialist, supports tariffs selectively to protect American workers from unfair trade practices and offshoring. And he was a vocal opponent of NAFTA when it was ratified. Also, tariffs are nothing new in American political history. Many early presidents such as George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and James Madison were for tariffs, primarily to protect infant industries from British competition, and to provide the United States with a national identity. In the late 19th century, Republican President William McKinley was by far the most pro-tariff president in U.S. history. arguing that foreign imports should pay the taxes and not American labor. The Trump administration has the same mindset as what McKinley promoted, although there are some huge differences. For one, in 1900, the United States was an industrial powerhouse, and the manufacturing sector provided a majority of jobs for Americans. Today, the United States is a post-industrial tertiary sector economy where the majority of Americans work in service sector jobs. Yes, there is a need for some manufacturing jobs, but automation or robotics have replaced a lot of these occupations. Another difference is globalization. In the early 20th century, the world was far less connected than it is today, and this led to more internalization of manufacturing in the US. By the late 20th century, this changed dramatically as offshoring became easier thanks to transportation breakthroughs such as planes and cargo ships that were able to provide easier trade capabilities between nations. And with China blossoming into an industrial powerhouse by the early 21st century, it benefited the most. And American corporations, such as tech companies like Apple, Dell, HP, as well as retail corporations like Amazon and Walmart, invested heavily in China, leading to further offshoring of product production. The Apple iPhone is designed in California by American hardware and software engineers, those with college degrees or advanced degrees who work as white-collar tertiary service sector employees. But then the design blueprints are sent overseas, where Foxconn, a Taiwanese electronics contract manufacturer, assembles it in Zhengzhou, China. Then the phones are shipped back to the United States or other nations where they're sold through retail channels. Pretty much, it's substantially cheaper for Apple to assemble their phones in China than if it were to be assembled in the United States, due to labor costs being much cheaper. If the base $799 iPhone 16 was assembled fully in the United States, it would cost between $100 to $300 more, leading to higher costs for the consumer. At the same time, tariffs will also raise the price. The Trump administration initially set a 145% tariff on Chinese imports, but readjusted it to 30%. Yet, even at that rate, prices will likely increase. The motivation for tariffs is to bring back American manufacturing, and while this may possibly work, it's not going to happen instantaneously. Hypothetically, if American corporations were going to bring back manufacturing to the US, it would take years to plan, construct, and open a plant. And likely, new manufacturing plants will not be constructed in the Rust Belt. This is due to states within it having strong unionization. Unions can be good and bad. Good in that they provide worker protection and negotiate with corporations for better wages and benefits, but bad in that they sometimes ask for too much, which in turn, if given, can lead to higher consumer cost. Therefore, manufacturing, if it were to come back to the US, would likely be implemented in conservative Republican Sunbelt states. Most of these states have right-to-work laws that prohibit union security agreements between employers and labor unions. Generally, corporations like these laws because of fewer restrictions and lesser chances for strikes and work stoppages. These laws have even attracted foreign manufacturers to build factories, including car companies like Toyota in Kentucky, Subaru in Indiana, Nissan in Tennessee and Mississippi, BMW in South Carolina, Mercedes-Benz in Alabama, and Volkswagen in Tennessee. It seems that the original American Rust Belt will never return to its original status as an industrial powerhouse. Over the last half century, there has just been too much of an economic shift within the United States, as it identifies now as a post-industrial society. In terms of industrial centers, corporations want places that will cut their costs and optimize their profits. And right now, China is still considered as one. But once China post-industrializes, which is happening currently, corporations are probably not going to come back and build manufacturing plants in the US, but rather they will relocate to prospective industrializing nations such as poor South and Southeast Asian nations, and even to sub-Saharan African nations like Nigeria. Thus, the only thing that can happen is that Rust Belt cities can revitalize themselves by diversifying their economies, such as what Pittsburgh has done. Other similar trends have been occurring in Indianapolis, Indiana, Columbus, Ohio, and Grand Rapids, Michigan, which is considered one of the best communities to live in the Midwest. Detroit is trying little by little to reinvent itself as a city, and it's slowly occurring, although there are many obstacles. Then there are some Rust Belt cities that have a low chance of transforming for the better. Flint, Michigan, a city 50 miles north of Detroit, used to thrive with work opportunities thanks to GM having 4 plants there. But the industrialization led to the plants laying off thousands of workers, leading to socioeconomic problems. And to add more insult to injury, Flint's government has lots of corruption, leading to financial mismanagement and other serious problems such as the Flint water crisis. Another city is Gary, Indiana, which at its height was a steel-producing powerhouse, but because of deindustrialization has now become plagued by extreme poverty, crime, and abandonment of homes and other buildings. On the whole, the Rust Belt may rejuvenate in the coming years, though its revitalization will likely be from different economic sectors, such as a service-based tertiary sector rather than a manufacturing-based secondary sector. And renewal of cities will be place-specific, which is dependent on several factors, including investment, improvements in education and healthcare, fighting crime, and governmental oversight. That concludes this week's episode. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you like learning about the world, you found the right channel. So be sure to subscribe to my channel, Urban to Earth, to view more videos. Until next time!